Geoff Mosher, who now covers the Eagles, formerly wrote newspaper, now over at FanRag Sports, covering the Eagles. Back on the Eagles beat, back with us here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Moshe, what's up, my friend?
Michael, Peter, my two favorite radio guys in Atlantic City. What's going on? Great to be back on with you. What a great weekend it is we've got ahead of us. You know, a little Andy Reid versus Doug Peterson and Kansas City, and I know Andy's a big topic for a lot of people today.
Yeah, well, yesterday we asked a question on Twitter that I was surprised by the result, asking if you, knowing what you now know, if you can go back, would you still have fired Andy Reid? 57% said no, they would have kept Andy. And I think Andy himself has admitted that he wore out his welcome and it was probably best to move on. But he moved on, as you wrote about, and is building a new program. I don't know if the Eagles have quite moved on positively yet. I think this game might teach us a lot more. But have the Eagles moved on from Andy yet in a positive direction?
Well, I mean, certainly they have not. It's taken a lot longer than obviously Jeffrey Lurie thought, because when he fired Andy, I mean, let's face it, we knew that Chip Kelly was high on the list, even though Lurie at the time said it's an open open search and everybody will be considered. They were enamored with Chip Kelly, and what they were enamored with was not just his offensive ingenuity at Oregon, but his reputation for building a program, you know, from top to bottom, sports science, culture, talent evaluation, being ahead of the curve, data, all of that stuff, analytics. So they thought they were getting this kind of czar of a head coach. And as I pointed out in the story, you know, how ironic is it that Andy, the guy they fire, winds up going over to Kansas City, and for a man who was known for being very stubborn, for being, you know, very reluctant to even go from the old traditional playbook to a tablet, he goes and gets Alex Smith and hires Chris Alt, who really devised the pistol formation himself and used it at Nevada with Colin Kaepernick. Then he joins Andy's staff, and the next thing you know, fast forward all these years, Andy's running read option, pistol formation, trick plays. He's running the whole college scheme that you kind of thought Chip Kelly was going to bring here. And not only that, Andy has turned over the roster. Now, I know he's not the GM, but he obviously has major influence in their personnel decisions. But they've been able to turn over a roster from Dwayne Bowe, and, you know, first it was Matt Castle before he traded for Alex Smith and Jamal Charles, and now he's got Tyreek Hill and Kareem Hunt and Travis Kelce. And the worst record he has during his turnover is 9-7. He wound up being the program builder that Jeffrey was looking for. But honestly, Mike, this doesn't happen if he doesn't get fired. You know, he was a stubborn guy here, and I think that, and I tried to ask him about it on the conference call yesterday, and, you know, Andy doesn't really open up too much, but I think in those hours after getting fired and, you know, the few days before getting hired as Kansas City's coach, he did a lot of soul searching and realized that, you know, he probably needed to get with the times a little more. And certainly getting Alex Smith was the first example, and then incorporating the pistol of him adapting. And then also taking the 3-4 personnel that they had there and hiring Bob Sutton, who was a 3-4 defensive coordinator. Again, look at the parallel. Chip comes here and tries to take a 4-3 team and does a terrible job of adapting it into a 3-4 personnel. So it's just so ironic that everything Andy has done in Kansas City is what Jeffrey thought Chip was going to do here, and here we are all these years later, kind of on an Andy clone and Doug Peterson, trying to rebuild the franchise that Chip destroyed.
I think it's interesting. Like, Andy was on the Known from Adam podcast with Schefter and said, yeah, I think I wore out my welcome. It was time. I think it worked out well for both of us. It certainly has worked out well for him. I don't know that it's worked out great yet for the Eagles, but Andy only had 3 losing seasons here. He has 11 double-digit winning seasons in his career, 3 of them in Kansas City, 8 of them in Philadelphia.
Right.
That 4-12 season was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, but he never had back-to-back losing seasons. But was it just that 4-12 season that really ended it all? Where do you think it went wrong it started to be like, all right, you're wearing out, you're welcome?
Oh, man, I could write a book about this. I really could. Having covered the team very deeply during that whole, 2010, 11, 12, everything, there are so many layers and so many elements. A lot of it has to do, obviously, with what was going on in the front office with Joe and Howie and, influencing decisions on him that he may or may not have wanted to make, like firing Sean McDermott. But if you really want to go back to where it all begins, you go back to firing Sean McDermott, hiring Jim Washburn. These are all very outside-the-box moves for Andy Reid, who was a man who stuck to his principles, for better or worse, a coach who was a big believer in what he did day in and day out, and that was the backbone for his success. Him not winning a Super Bowl after 12 years forced him, along with, people he worked with, to start to switch things up. So he fires Sean McDermott. He brings in Jim Washburn, who implements a certain defensive line scheme that a lot of defensive coordinators don't agree with or want. And so, therefore, guys like Dennis Allen, guys like Todd Bowles, they're in the building in and out because this thing is, not very attractive. And then, Andy's got no choice but to then make Juan Castillo his defensive coordinator, and then Howard Mudd is the offensive line, and now you're drafting different kind of offensive linemen than you've ever drafted. You're bringing, obviously separate Andy, Joe, and Howie, get all enamored with Nnamdi Asomugha, and, it was just a big perfect storm. There was a lot of pieces that didn't fit. It was a coach making moves he normally doesn't make. It was a front office in desperation mode, trying to win a Super Bowl as the years go by, making bad moves. It was no checks and balances in the front office. So, like I said, it's a multi-chaptered book I can write, and what it led to was, obviously disaster for 2 years coming out of that strike and Andy having to get fired.
Moshe, that was like a walk down memory lane, and I got chills because it wasn't necessarily a comfortable walk or an easy walk. Geoff Mosher with us.
That's like a walk down Elm Street. You walk down Elm Street with Freddy Krueger staring at you, buddy.
Yeah, he's coming. So, Geoff, has Andy ever explained or even spoken about his decision to elevate Juan Castillo to that D coordinator role? Was that another big factor in him getting fired?
I don't know if he has ever talked directly, extensively about it, obviously, in reporting on it when it happened, and then more so even a year later when you get more information about how it happened. Like I mentioned, there were a lot of coordinators that he talked to who did not want the job because there was already a guy like Jim Washburn who was such a strong personality in place there, and he was going to run this 4-3 wide 9 scheme no matter what. So, they kind of handcuffed, and it did for Juan, kind of handcuffed what you can do when your defensive line coach is kind of like your co-defensive coordinator. So that was really the root of the issues there and why Andy had no other choice but to go to Juan Castillo there. And, as you saw, the defense really fell apart.
I got to imagine there was some other choices other than Juan Castillo.
Maybe there was, but it wasn't, for the personnel. Maybe he was looking at a 4-3 guy. I just know there were a lot of guys that Andy looked at before Juan Castillo, and for whatever reason, and what I was told was that a lot of people looked at the Jim Washburn thing sideways, that it just wasn't an attractive job. So,
gotcha.
Hey, by the way, one real thing that clued off a lot about the problems with Jim that we later came to find out, and Juan, is when Andy fired Jim Washburn, he had a press conference the next day, he spoke about it, and out of nowhere, at the end of the press conference, he says something like, by the way, I just want to say I think Juan Castillo is a hell of a football coach. And it was a weird thing to say at the time about Juan because it had nothing, Juan had long been fired. This was Jim Washburn's firing. So it was kind of Andy's way of saying, I feel bad that Juan had to be the first fall guy when the problems really started, with us firing Sean McDermott and then hiring Jim Washburn at the urging of some people in my front office around me.
The other factor is Easter. They trade Donovan. They draft Kevin Cobb. But then Cobb gets knocked out. They go to Vic. They decide to stay with Vic. Vic can't stay healthy. They go to Foles. Do you think the quarterback decision to get rid of McNabb? Did they do that too early? Did they put their eggs in the wrong basket? Did that play a big factor in the demise?
No, I would say this, Mike, and it's so funny you bring that up because, you know, my memories of that year are sitting next to you down in at the shop, I believe, on Mondays, and you and I arguing over whether Vic should be the quarterback on there. Fun times, and I was squarely in the cow camp, and how wrong I was. I think the problem, I don't think Andy did the wrong thing by hitching his wagon to Vic. I think the strike really hurt, and they're trying to develop him the next year when they couldn't, develop him as much. And then obviously the turmoil around the team after that was tough. I would say their problem is that Kevin was not the guy that they, thought that he would be. And then even if you kind of go to where they are now, Chip Kelly came in and never drafted a quarterback. I mean, he was always trying to make it work with Mike. He tried to make it work with Nick Foles, who was drafted by Andy. Then as soon as Nick wins 15 of 18 starts, he gets traded for Sam Bradford. There was never a homegrown quarterback here other than Foles, and Chip really kind of lost faith in him. You want to really peel the layer back. Their inability to get Russell Wilson that draft in 2013 is it draft where he went in the third round a little higher, and then the Eagles didn't trade up, so they stuck there and took Nick Foles. I thought Nick played well under Andy, and maybe Andy could have developed him. He certainly played better in Kansas City than he played under Geoff Mosher. Maybe Andy could have developed him if he hadn't been fired, but in general, I just thought it was just as a whole, the franchise's inability after moving on from Donovan to make a move to draft a real franchise quarterback until Carson Wentz really hurt them.
Fascinating discussion with Geoff Mosher about Andy Reid as the Eagles and Doug Peterson go up against the Chiefs. And Andy Reid, and of course, the storyline, the teacher and the pupil, and they go up against each other. Jeff, I don't have the stats right in front of me, but I know that Andy has had pretty good success going up against his former assistants. Do you foresee that continuing?
Well, he's 8-2, I believe, is the stat against his former assistants.
8-3.
8-3, my fault. So he's been pretty good. I don't know if I put much into that, other than he's probably had the better team most of the time. I'd have to go and see, who he was playing at that time and what the teams were. But I do foresee him getting a ninth win today, if that's what you're asking me. I mean, Sunday, Pete, if that's what you're asking. I think that they're just a better team. They're a faster team on defense than Washington was. Yeah, obviously, it's just one game, but their offense looked a whole lot more in sync than Washington's offense. Do I think it's going to be a cakewalk for the Chiefs? No. I think if the Eagles play defense like they did against Washington, they can stay in the game. But in the end of the day, without Ronald Darby, you're talking about Tyreek Hill against one cornerback and Jalen Mills, who runs a 4.6. And, I assume on the other side they're going to have to go with Jalen Watkins, who ran a 4.4, but, he hasn't played a whole lot of corner. It's a recipe for disaster, I think.
Read more about the Eagles and this matchup. FanRag Sports. Geoff Mosher covers the Eagles. Follow him on Twitter at Geoff Mosher NFL. And listen to him here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. A nice trip down Elm Street there, pal.
Always.
We'll catch up with you next week, Geoff Mosher.
Again next week or something.
All right, man.
Thanks,
Geoff Mosher here on the Sports Bash. Back with Moshe. He's back on the beat. Love the fact that he's back on that Eagles beat.